The year is 1993 and the 16-bit era has really hit its stride, with developers starting to fully take advantage of the new hardware, leading to massive leaps forward and resulting in some huge franchise-making releases. And with the advances come a level of fierce competition never before seen. Keep an eye on the figures for copies sold as we go through, because the console war between Nintendo and SaGa started to lead to some surprising growth in sales, not to mention growth in the budding PC gaming industry. No one knew at the time just which platform would eventually break out and win the war, but looking back, we know the real winners were gamers themselves. The barrier to entry to our top 40 best-selling games of the year has never been higher, so let us know in the comments if there were any you were hoping would appear that didn't make the cut. Number 40, Star Wars X-Wing. Star Wars X-Wing was the first Star Wars game ever released on the PC, pioneering the use of polygonal 3D graphics in space combat simulations at a time when most competitors were still relying on bitmap graphics. This allowed for more dynamic and realistic ship models and environments compared to contemporaries like Wing Commander. In the game, one of many published by LucasArts in the early 90s, players assume the role of rebel pilot Kian Farlander in a narrative that precedes and parallels Star Wars A New Hope, starting with training and progressing through 3 tours of duty, culminating in, of course, the iconic Death Star assault. Gameplay involves piloting X-Wing, Y-Wing, or A-Wing fighters in missions like dogfights, escorts, and attacks on Imperial ships, with unique mechanics for energy allocation between shields, engines, and weapons, wingman commands, and strategic objectives. X-Wing was created by Lawrence Holland and his company Totally Games, which had worked on a whole bunch of World War II combat fighter sims with LucasArts before, so when it came time to make a game about X-Wings, they knew exactly where to turn. Holland would comment in an interview, "Even though it was happening in space, the way these ships flew, the speed, the way they interacted was very World War II-esque. So we got to migrate to this world that really drew from our roots but freed us from historical events." Number 39, Super Scope 6. Super Scope 6 is a shooter game developed by Nintendo themselves for the Super Nintendo, and what made this special is its very unique Super Scope light gun peripheral that it came bundled with. Gameplay revolves around aiming and firing the wireless light gun at on-screen targets, starting with a calibration shot for accuracy. There are 6 mini-games, hence the name Super Scope 6, and the games are split into Blastress, puzzle variants like shooting to manipulate falling blocks in Tetris style or column style modes, and Mole Patrol for whack-a-mole action, and Laser Blazer, space-themed shooters like Intercept for missile defense, Engage for fuel-managed combat, and Confront for infinite ammo invasions. While Super Scope 6 is the game many people remember most when they think of the Super Scope peripheral, there were actually 12 games that were compatible with it. Some examples included Yoshi's Safari, which remains to this day the only Mario franchise game to feature first-person shooter gameplay, Battle Clash, which was made by Intelligent Systems, who would later become notable for fan favorites like Fire Emblem, Paper Mario, and WarioWare, and somewhat surprisingly, Lemmings 2, where you could use the Super Scope to blast away at the little lemmings for some lighthearted fun. Ultimately though, the Super Scope never achieved widespread success, and sales of the peripheral were disappointing for Nintendo, so after an initial wave of games in 93 and 94, no others were created for the Super Scope. But while the Super Scope may have underperformed for Nintendo, at least they got SaGa to waste resources on their own light gun in response, the Menacer, which managed to flop way harder than the Super Scope. Number 38, Flashback. In 2142, Agent Conrad B. Hart awakens on Titan with amnesia after discovering shape-shifting morph aliens infiltrating humanity. He uncovers the plot via a holographic message and journeys across 7 levels, from jungles to dystopian cities and alien worlds. This is Flashback, a cinematic platformer developed by Delphine Software as a follow-up to their hit 1991 game Out of This World. Interestingly, Delphine began life as Delphine Records, created in France in the 1970s by Paul de Senneville, and named after his first daughter. Because of this, it came as no surprise when an official CD soundtrack was released featuring music inspired by the game. The game itself, though, was quite similar to Delphine's first go at a multi-platform rotoscope-style adventure, and was equally well received. Critics loved the fluid movement, but positive reviews especially focused on the immersive visuals, with EGM's Dave Pyron commenting, "Flashback really excels in the graphics department. Each screen is rendered in sharply detailed VGA graphics. As in Out of This World, cinematic sequences bridge together the plot and give the player a much-needed rest from the action." Players loved it too, and shortly after launch, Guinness World Records named it the best-selling French game of all time, which contributed significantly to the gaming industry in France, which was still largely in its infancy at that time. An HD remake was released in 2013, with original designer Paul Suizet making his return, though unfortunately this version was not as well received as the original. Number 37, Dragon Ball Z Super Butoden 2. The team behind Dragon Ball Z Super Butoden began development on a sequel after only 1 week's vacation, and as a result both games released in 1993, though with this second title only releasing at the very tail end of the year, it wouldn't catch its predecessor until the following year in sales. Like the first, Super Butoden 2 is a fighting game developed by Toes and published by Bandai, involving one-on-one matches to deplete enemy health using punches, kicks, special moves, and, excitingly, Kai blasts. This time, the story follows the Z fighters training to battle Cell in his tournament, with branching paths incorporating side stories from the DBZ films like Brawly the Legendary Super Saiyan and BoJack Unbound. The game didn't come out in North America, which makes sense given the popular anime series wouldn't even air there until 1996. However, Super Butoden 2 did receive a European release the following year, and even though this was generally well regarded, the translation was notoriously bad and sometimes nonsensical, deterring from the seriousness of the game. Technically, the game was finally released in North America in 2015 when Extreme Butoden came out for the 3DS, when Amazon offered a download code for Super Butoden 2 as a free bonus for pre-orders. Number 36, FIFA International Soccer. FIFA, the billion-dollar EA game series with over 40 titles across an astonishing 3-decade run, began in 1993 with FIFA International Soccer. While developed by Canadian studio Extended Play Productions, which would eventually become known as EA Vancouver, FIFA was originally conceived of by several members of EA UK, which at that time was a tiny regional branch that didn't even have its own development team, but they were convinced that an authentic European football experience would be a hit game, so they tasked external developers Jules Burt and John Law, who had recently pitched EA on a volleyball game, with coming up with a prototype. My dad kept popping in while we were working, remembered Bert in a 2023 interview, and he was like, "Why can't you make it look more like TV?" So at one point, for some reason, we thought, let's try an isometric pitch. And so we did. John laid it out, I got the scrolling working again, and we got some action going when we were like, hey, this is really cool actually. This isometric view, inspired by TV broadcasts, became a defining feature of the game, which was praised for its unique take on the genre and became a huge hit. Such a huge hit, in fact, that it comes in at number 36 on our list despite releasing in the last month of the year. Number 35, Sonic CD. Sonic CD is a platformer for the SaGa CD where Sonic speeds to Little Planet, a miraculous world appearing annually over Never Lake to thwart Dr. Robotnik's plan to chain it and seize the Time Stones for time domination. Gameplay builds on classic Sonic mechanics, running, jumping, spinning through loops and enemies, collecting rings for health and battling bosses. But there's plenty new and innovative as well, especially the groundbreaking time travel mechanic where players can warp between past, present, and future versions of levels by accelerating past signposts, altering layouts, music, and obstacles to create good futures by destroying robot generators in the past. This adds immense replayability as achieving good futures in all zones unlocks the best ending of the game. The game was the first in the Sonic series to feature fully animated cutscenes, hand-drawn by Toei Animation's Studio Junyo under tight schedules, providing cinematic storytelling that introduced characters and advanced the plot. It also marked the debut of Metal Sonic, a robotic doppelganger designed as a speedy rival with a jet engine for propulsion, and Amy Rose, Sonic's pink hedgehog admirer who gets kidnapped by Metal Sonic. Interestingly, the game features 2 distinct soundtracks due to creative and cultural differences between SaGa's Japanese and American teams. The Japanese score, created by Naofumi Hataya and Masafumi Ogata, leaned into electronic house and techno, leveraging the SaGa CD's advanced audio. Hataya explained, "We were excited to explore new musical territory with the CD format, aiming for a futuristic, energetic vibe that matched the game's innovative spirit and pushed the boundaries of what game music could be. But SaGa of America deemed the Japanese music too niche for US players, so they actually delayed the release of the game by 2 months to commission a new soundtrack. This one by Spencer Nilsson, David Young, and Mark Crew, favoring a rock-infused atmospheric style. Nilsson noted, "Our goal was to create a sound that felt more cinematic and emotionally complex, something that would resonate with American audiences and enhance the game's time travel narrative. This decision has sparked fan debate ever since, with some loving the Japanese energy and others the US moodiness." Earning praise from both fans and critics, Sonic CD will unfortunately be the only SaGa CD game to appear in this series of videos, as the system was ultimately deemed a failure. Number 34, Ecco the Dolphin. Ecco the Dolphin was developed by the Hungarian studio Novo Trade International, marking one of the early instances of Eastern European developers creating a major title for the Sega Genesis, bringing a unique pacifist perspective influenced by their cultural gaming style. This non-violent approach set it apart from typical action games of the era. Instead, players rely on speed, intelligence, and environmental manipulation to overcome challenges. A bold departure from the North American-focused combat-heavy games dominating the Genesis library. The story follows Ecco's quest across oceans and through time to rescue his pod, which has been mysteriously abducted by a massive storm, uncovering an extraterrestrial threat that harvests Earth's life every 500 years. Gameplay emphasizes exploration in side-scrolling underwater levels, using sonar for echolocation to solve puzzles, communicate with marine creatures, map areas, and stun foes. Despite the unique premise, Ecco sold well, and even earned a few sequels like 2000's Ecco the Dolphin Defender of the Future on the Dreamcast. Unfortunately, a second Dreamcast game was cancelled when the system itself was discontinued. Eventually, creator Ed Annunciata attempted to create a spiritual successor, though after a legal battle with SaGa he was unable to obtain the rights to the Ecco name, a factor he considers the #1 reason his revival project failed. But there may just be a happy ending yet for fans of the adventurous dolphin, because in May 2025, Annunciata announced that he and SaGa were working on an official sequel. Number 33, Torneko's Great Adventure, Mystery Dungeon. If you're a big enough fan of Pokemon, then you're probably familiar with the Mystery Dungeon games. But did you know that the Mystery Dungeon franchise began all the way back in 1993, over 3 years before Pokemon even existed? That's right, Mystery Dungeon's first entry was Torneko's Great Adventure, a spin-off of Dragon Quest IV, starring its lovable merchant Torneko. In the story, Torneko, his wife Nini, and son Poporo move to a new kingdom where he opens up a shop. Hearing rumors of a treasure-filled mystery dungeon, Torneko ventures in to collect riches and expand his business, facing dangers to fulfill his dream of the world's greatest store. The game involves turn-based exploration of procedurally generated dungeons with 99 floors, battling monsters from Dragon Quest, managing inventory, hunger, and traps. Players identify items, level up temporarily per run, and lose most progress upon death, but can bank items and gold for upgrades. Torneko's Great Adventure was created by Chunsoft's Koichi Nakamura and Seiichiro Nagahata after the latter became fascinated with the 1980s dungeon crawler Rogue. Seeing potential in this type of game, Nakamura wanted to create a rogue-like game that was a little more accessible. As he said in a 2014 interview, "Compared with mainstream RPGs like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, I felt the rules for Rogue, including a system wherein you lose all of your equipment, money, and levels when you die, were a little hard for new players to understand. I thought we should at least let players know the names of items and monsters. And as we thought further about how to make it easier to grasp, we started to think that using Dragon Quest characters might be the best way to achieve that. Then we asked which Dragon Quest character would be most appropriate. If we made Torneko the hero, it would be easy for players to understand the goal of collecting items and treasure. So we asked Yuji Horii and he gave us permission, and Torneko's Great Adventure was born. And the rest, as they say, was history." Number 32, Cool Spot. Cool Spot is a clever advert game, blending soda branding with solid platforming. It was developed by Virgin Games, and players control Spot, the red dot from the 7-Up logo, on a mission to rescue his Spot brethren trapped in cages across 11 vibrant levels. The basic story follows Spot discovering his friend's captivity and embarking on an adventure through beaches, piers, toy stores, and laboratories. Gameplay emphasizes collecting red spots to reach a required percentage for progression, jumping across platforms, climbing objects, and attacking foes by firing directional soda bubbles. Health is tracked via a distorting spot face, a fun and interesting twist borrowed from games like Wolfenstein 3D or Doom, which came out the same year. Strict time limits, checkpoints, and bonus bottle stages for earning Uncola continues add challenge and replayability to the game. As detailed in the original manual, players could win a cool prize by beating the game on hard difficulty without using any of the 6 Uncola letters for a continue. Upon completion, a screen with a Spot holding a camera would appear, instructing players to take a picture of the screen and mail it to Virgin Games headquarters. Even though the contest officially ended on December 31st, 1993, Gerard at the Completionist YouTube channel completed the challenge years later, and after tweeting a picture to 7-Up in 2014, the company actually sent him a palette of assorted 7-Up products, sunglasses, and loudspeakers as a prize. Despite most product mascot tie-in games being infamously bad, Cool Spot is considered a notable exception to this, as its quality and overall fun set it apart from the rest. In fact, the game was so decent it even released in Europe without the 7-Up branding due to licensing issues with PepsiCo. Number 31, Romancing Saga 2. Following up on the Japan-only Romancing Saga 2 is a role-playing game where players control a dynasty of rulers in the Kingdom of Avalon, battling the corrupted 7 heroes. The story follows Leon and his heirs as they expand the Empire and defeat the demons, with gameplay focusing on non-linear exploration and turn-based battles. Unlike traditional RPGs, Romancing Saga lacks experience points, with character growth dependent on actions taken during battles. But that's not even the most unique thing about this game. What really sets it apart are the generational succession system and empire management system. The game spans multiple generations, following the royal family of the Varanus Empire, starting with Emperor Leon and his sons Victor and Gerard. After key story events or the death of an emperor, the player selects a new heir from a pool of characters made up of recruited party members or generated successors. Each new generation inherits certain abilities, skills, and empire resources from the previous one, creating a sense of continuity. However, the specifics of inheritance, like skill levels, depend on the state of the empire and characters at the time of succession. As Emperor, the player manages the Varanus Empire, which grows as regions are annexed. Empire management, therefore, is a core progression mechanic, influencing available resources and story options. Gold is used to fund Empire projects, recruit characters, or equip the party, and players can invest in facilities like magic research labs to develop new spells, a forge to craft better weapons, or a university to unlock new classes or technologies. These projects enhance party capabilities and open up new gameplay options. Romancing Saga 2 went on to become the best-selling of the original Saga trilogy for the Super Nintendo, and it made such a mark that a remake was developed by Square Enix and released in 2024 to very good reception. Number 30, Dr. Mario. Making its third appearance in the top 40, Dr. Mario's gameplay transforms Mario into a physician battling viruses with colored capsules, requiring players to rotate and align them in a bottle to match and eliminate red, blue, and yellow viruses in groups of 4. It's interesting to think back on this era in gaming, when sometimes the simplest of concepts were the ones that rocketed to mainstream success. We all remember playing puzzle games like Dr. Mario in the 90s, trying our best to make it ever further in single-player mode or challenging friends and family to a little bit of multiplayer mayhem. But to be honest with you, it's hard to recall exactly why, when there were so many classic platformers, grand RPGs, complex and deep simulation games. Why did so many choose instead to while away an afternoon matching multicolored pills? I think the answer is that sometimes you just really don't feel like you have the time to dedicate to starting a grand adventure or mastering a complicated mechanic. Sometimes you just want to jump onto a game and relax and have some fun. And the self-contained, time-limited, and repetitive nature of games like Dr. Mario made them the perfect fit for just that kind of gaming. It was Tetris, of course, that tapped into this first, and most successfully. In fact, Hank Rogers, co-founder of the Tetris company, had this to say about Dr. Mario many years later. Dr. Mario was a blatant attempt to come up with a Tetris replacement, and I thought they did it in a cheesy way. Cheesy or not, sometimes you just can't argue with popularity. Number 29, The Magical Quest starring Mickey Mouse. Adding yet another successful and high-quality Disney tie-in platformer to the pile, Capcom developed The Magical Quest starring Mickey Mouse for release in 1992. Mickey, playing catch with Pluto, Goofy, and Donald, falls into a magical land where Emperor Pete has kidnapped Pluto. Guided by a wizard, Mickey traverses 6 levels: Treetops, Dark Forest, Fire Grotto, Pete's Peak, Snowy Valley, and Pete's Castle to rescue his dog, defeating enchanted bosses along the way. Spoiler alert, at the end of the adventure it's revealed that it was all a dream. Go figure. Gameplay focuses on jumping, throwing blocks and enemies, and switching costumes for abilities. Magician, using magic blasts and underwater breathing. Firefighter, with a water spray. And Climber, featuring a grappling hook. Collect hearts for health and coins for items. The game offers unlimited continues, making it forgiving for beginners and very accessible for young gamers. But this did lead to some criticism for it being too easy, even on hard mode. There were some valid criticisms of the game, including the fact that the multiplayer was limited to alternating 2-player rather than simultaneous co-op. There was also some grumbling about the fact that a Super Nintendo game in 1992 or 93 would still be using a password-based progression system rather than fully fledged saving. Despite these criticisms, the game was mostly regarded well. No surprise, considering that by that time Capcom had become very well known for the quality of their Disney tie-ins. So well known, in fact, that Capcom insisted development staff use pseudonyms in the credits to prevent poaching by rival companies. Number 28, Road Rash 2. EA's racing and vehicular combat game for the Genesis returns from 1992, increasing a few positions to earn a spot solidly in the top 30. The player controls a motorcycle racer competing in races across the United States, including Hawaii, Arizona, Tennessee, Alaska, and Vermont. The goal is to finish in the top 3 among 14 racers to advance through 5 levels using punches, kicks, and weapons like chains to hinder opponents. There's something enduring about the gameplay of the original Road Rash trilogy that no other game has really been able to capture since then, despite many attempts at spiritual successors. Even programmer and co-designer of Road Rash 2, Dan Geisler, who did an Ask Me Anything on Reddit in 2012, stated, "I never got tired of playing Road Rash 2, even years after I finished it. Most games I've worked on, with the exception of Tetris, I was done with them by the time they shipped." But Dan and his team would save the best for last because the final entry of the original Road Rash games for the Genesis, 1995's Road Rash 3, would be the most successful of them all. Number 27, Final Fight 2. Final Fight 2 is a side-scrolling beat-em-up developed by Capcom, the sequel to the classic 1989 arcade title Final Fight, which was itself ported to the Super Nintendo 1 year later. In the story, after the Mad Gear Gang's defeat in the original game, they resurge under new leader Retu and kidnap Guy's fiancée Rina and her father in Japan. With Guy absent, Mayor Mike Hager teams up with Carlos Miyamoto and Maki Genryusai, Rina's sister, to travel across Eurasia, battling Mad Gear in 6 stages ending in Japan. Similar to the first game, gameplay involves punching, jumping, and grabbing enemies with special moves, weapons from breakables, and boss fights. Addressing one of the big complaints from the original Final Fight port though, Final Fight 2 supports 2-player co-op. The Final Fight series had reinvigorated Capcom, which was rising from a near catastrophe in the early 90s and emerging from a very uncertain period. But this second entry came a lot later than some people expected, owing in large part to Yoshiko Okamoto, the producer of the first game, moving on to Street Fighter 2. He later recalled in an interview, "Capcom was in trouble at the time. If Final Fight didn't sell well, Capcom might have been in danger of going under. But it actually sold more than Capcom executives expected it to, so after it took off, they told me to create Final Fight 2. I'm not the type of person to do what I'm told though, so I said, well, I don't want to do that, and then I decided to make Street Fighter 2. And so, in stepped Takuro Fujiwara, a legendary Capcom developer who's even been named one of the greatest game creators of all time by outfits like IGN. Under Fujiwara, this first original non-arcade take on Final Fight became an immediate success and even outperformed the first Super Nintendo entry. Number 26, Super Bomberman. Set in Diamond City, where Carrot Diamond and Dr. Mook hold a robot tournament to steal Bomberman's combat abilities, Super Bomberman has you dropping bombs to destroy walls and enemies, triggering chain reactions as you avoid being caught up in the blast. Super was far from the first Bomberman game. Iterations had come out for the PC, NES, Game Boy, Amiga, Atari, TurboGrafx-16, arcade, and others. But this 16-bit entry brought a level of polish and replayability heretofore unseen in the franchise. Especially beloved by fans is the multiplayer battle mode, which supports up to 4 players if you've got a multi-tap device. Helpfully, Hudson Soft had one such device and even bundled it with a game. Thus, for a lot of 90s kids, Super Bomberman became one of their first experiences with 4-player simultaneous gaming. Super Bomberman breathed new life into an old series, and in turn even launched its own series of games. So far there have been 7 entries in the Super Bomberman series since the original, with the most recent, Super Bomberman R2, releasing for 8th and 9th gen consoles in 2023. Number 25, Madden NFL 94. In Madden NFL 94, players select from 80 different teams, including current rosters, historical Super Bowl squads, and all-time greats, to compete in exhibition games, full 16-game seasons, or playoffs. Gameplay emphasizes strategic play calling, with options like bluffing or flipping formations, controlling offenses via passing, running, or no-huddle tempos, and defenses through tackling and coverage. Unique features include screen rotations during special teams plays and rotatable instant replays, all viewed from an isometric perspective for tactical depth. This 9th entry in the Madden franchise featured refined menus and team selection screens, a significant upgrade from earlier games, making navigation more intuitive and visually appealing. It was also the first game in the series to incorporate the official NFL license, allowing for authentic team names, logos, and uniforms from the 1993-94 season. Perhaps most importantly, at least for those of us who remain just a bit more than a tad nostalgic for this era, Madden 94 was the first ever game to include the iconic audio tagline EA Sports, it's in the game.
EA Sports, it's in the game.
Andrew Anthony, who recorded the line, later recalled, "It was the early 90s, I think it was 92, 93 maybe, and I had a friend in the advertising business who was working down here, and he was approached by the Electronic Arts people, who had probably 7 employees at the time, and they said, 'Could you come up with a TV commercial for us?' And I think his initial response was, no, I don't know who you are." And then when they convinced him, he came up with this whole line. It originally was, "If it's in the game, EA Sports, it's in the game." And then he called me up in Toronto, his old buddy, and said, "Hey, will you do the voice for this thing? For free?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I will. I don't even know what this is, but I get a free trip down to see you, so for sure." And I recorded, and I thought I would never ever hear anything about that again. The tagline, of course, became a staple for EA Sports titles in the years that followed. It's hard to believe that such an iconic part of gaming history was put together in such a slapdash manner and recorded completely for free. Number 24, Kirby's Adventure. A rare NES title to make the list in the waning years of that platform, Kirby's Adventure is the second game in the Kirby franchise, following 1992's Kirby's Dream Land on the Game Boy. In Kirby's Adventure, Kirby discovers that King Dedede has stolen the Star Rod from the Fountain of Dreams, shattering it into 7 pieces and giving them to his bosses, causing nightmares in Dreamland. Kirby sets out to collect the pieces and restore peaceful dreams. Kirby's Adventure established a lot of the staples of the Kirby universe that we take for granted today. For instance, this was the first time that Kirby could copy enemy abilities by inhaling them. Over 40 copy abilities were originally brainstormed, including unused ones like shrinking, riding a rocket, creating blocks, turning into a puddle, or an animal ability for scratching and biting. But only the best 26 could make the cut to fit hardware limits. And those hardware limits were very real, as this was pretty late in the NES's life cycle, and the game's cartridge is one of the largest for NES at a whopping 6 megabits. This did enable advanced graphics and features that pushed the system's limits though, making it much more powerful than many standard NES titles, but nonetheless there was a lot that would need to be saved for future entries. In addition to copy abilities, the game also marked the debut of Meta Knight as a mysterious boss who tosses Kirby a sword before battle, adding a layer of honor and intrigue that would be echoed in later entries. Given that the first game on the Game Boy was monochromatic, Kirby's Adventure was also the first time Kirby's color was confirmed as pink, surprising even some of the employees at Studio Hell Laboratory. Says Shigeru Miyamoto, "I remember the first time I saw the color illustration. Yeah, pink. That looks good," I thought to myself. Normally a character like Kirby would have been yellow, think Pac-Man or New Bao. That's why when I saw Kirby with a different color, it felt really fresh. Intriguingly, a Japanese commercial for Kirby's Adventure featured a yarn version of Kirby, eerily foreshadowing the game Kirby's Epic Yarn, which would come out almost 20 years later. Number 23, X-Men. 1993's X-Men is an action platformer for the Genesis that follows the X-Men combating a computer virus that has infected their training facility, the Danger Room, causing holographic simulations of their adventures to turn lethally real. Players must defeat the virus by navigating dangerous zones and battling villains like Magneto. Gameplay involves selecting from 4 heroes, Cyclops, Wolverine, Gambit, and Nightcrawler, each with unique powers, switching between them strategically and summoning other X-Men as helpers like Storm. The game is well known to this day for its high difficulty level, and while there are varying difficulty settings available, on the easiest setting the game actually restricts you from moving on past the first 3 stages, meaning if you want to unlock the full game you have no choice but to simply get good. One interesting feature of X-Men is the somewhat rare use of the reset button on the console. During the Mojo's Crunch level, you need to press the physical reset button on the Genesis in order to reboot the Danger Room computer and progress with the game. While this was cool, this feature also meant that the game is actually impossible to beat on the Nomad, which was a unique handheld developed by SaGa that allowed you to play Genesis games on the go. The developers could hardly be blamed, of course, since the Nomad wasn't even out yet until 2 years later, but it was limitations like this in part that led to the Nomad's eventual commercial failure. Number 22, NHL 94. Another EA Sports title to come out in 1993 was NHL 94. Select from 26 teams, including new expansions like the Mighty Duck and Panthers, to compete in modes like exhibition games, playoffs, or shootouts with the goal of winning the Stanley Cup. This entry in the NHL franchise was such a huge upgrade that it's considered by some to this day to be among the very best hockey games ever made. Like Madden 94 earlier with the NFL, this was the first in the series to secure licenses from both the NHL and the NHL Players Association, enabling the use of real player names, team logos, and the Stanley Cup trophy for an authentic experience. It introduced the one-timer shot mechanic, allowing players to shoot the puck immediately off a pass, which became a highly effective and satisfying way to score goals. Manual control of the goaltender was added, letting players switch to the goalie during play for precise saves. There's even a little cinematic that plays when a player scores 3 goals in a single game, where fans throw hats onto the ice to celebrate the hat trick. All of this despite NHL 94 being lead programmer Mark Lesser's first ever attempt at a hockey game. He's noted in interviews since then, "I hadn't the vaguest concept of hockey when I took the job. I'd never watched a hockey game. I didn't know anything about it." An ironic twist, given that for many 90s gamer kids, NHL 94 was how they first learned the rules of the game. Number 21, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Continuing its 3-year run on our list, but dropping a few positions from 13th in 1992, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past introduced the concept of parallel worlds to the famous Zelda series, with the Light World and Dark World allowing players to switch between them using portals or the Magic Mirror, which transforms the environment and enables unique puzzle solving and exploration. This duality added depth to the overworld, making navigation and secret discovery feel innovative, especially way back when the game released in 1991. Series creator Shigeru Miyamoto considers A Link to the Past to be the real sequel to the first Zelda game, despite a second game of course being released between the two to mixed reception. Miyamoto worked extra hard to ensure this third entry wouldn't meet the same fate. He later recalled, "We actually see A Link to the Past as the real sequel to Legend of Zelda." Zelda 2 was more of a side story that happened to Link after the happenings in Legend of Zelda. During development, I worked so hard that people asked me, "What are you going to do when your body gives out since you never go home?" But I always ensure that I got 8 hours of sleep a day so my brain doesn't get tired. There's an interesting Easter egg in the game with a nod to one of Miyamoto's other creations. In Kakariko Village, there are houses with portraits hung on the wall of a certain mustachioed man wearing a red hat that has an M on it. You can even get some rupees to drop out of one of them by interacting with it. Number 20, Lemmings. Lemmings was right up there with Tetris in the way that it influenced gaming in the 90s and spawned a whole genre of imitators and copycats, some of which innovated in their own ways to create something truly unique and wonderful. For example, there was The Humans, where players guide a tribe of prehistoric humans to a goal by assigning them tasks like stacking, throwing, or using tools. Troddlers, where you control sorcerers who guide zombie-like troddlers to a goal by placing blocks, directing their paths, or removing obstacles. Creepers, in which worm-like creatures called creepers are guided to the goal by manipulating the environment, such as placing blocks or redirecting their paths. Lost Vikings, Blizzard's first ever sole-developed game where players control 3 Vikings with unique abilities to navigate puzzles and reach a goal. Krusty's Funhouse, a fun Simpsons-themed take on the genre where Krusty guides rats to their deaths via gruesome traps. And The Incredible Machine, which has you build contraptions to guide objects, sometimes creatures like mice or balls, to a goal by arranging tools and environmental elements. But probably the most successful take on the Lemmings formula was none other than Lemmings' own sequel, Lemmings 2: The Tribes. Releasing in 1993, Lemmings 2 features much the same gameplay as the first game, but with a drastically increased set of skills to use to guide your green-haired friends to safety. Lemmings 2 was a commercial success, but nevertheless only sold a fraction of the copies that its predecessor did, as the original was still going fairly strong even in 1993. In fact, 93 would mark the debut of the original Lemmings game on several platforms, including the Game Boy, 3DO, and Philips CDI. Number 19, Streets of Rage 2. Streets of Rage 2 really came into its own in 1993 after a release in late 92, nearly tripling sales and rocketing up to the top 20 globally as it expanded into other territories. Though the beat-em-up gameplay, story, characters, and lasting legacy of Streets of Rage 2 are often the focus of retrospective lookbacks, what sometimes gets overlooked is the game's groundbreaking soundtrack. Composed by the legendary Yuzo Koshiro, this masterpiece fused gritty street fights with euphoric electronic vibes, drawing from Tokyo's underground clubs and LA's MTV-fueled techno scene. Influences like The Orb's ambient house, Prodigy's raw energy, and even Madonna's pop flair infused tracks like Go Straight with infectious rhythms that made every punch feel like a bass drop. Koshiro, a self-taught prodigy who started by secretly recording arcade tunes as a teen, pushed the Genesis hardware to its limits using FM synthesis for lush strings and percussion, plus PCM sampling for thunderous drums. To push the most out of the era's hardware constraints, he invented his own audio programming language, a custom MML variant. Writing for EGM in 1993, Bill Kunkel stated, "Yuzo Koshiro is just about universally acknowledged as the most gifted composer currently working in the video game field, and the music for both Streets of Rage games demonstrate his skill to ideal effect." Impressively, the prolific composer remains active to this day with credits like the upcoming 2025 action-adventure title Mina the Hollower by Yacht Club Games. Number 18. Secret of Mana. In a high fantasy world, a boy named Randy pulls the legendary mana sword from a stone, upsetting the balance of mana and drawing the attention of the evil empire, which seeks to revive the ancient flying mana fortress to conquer the world. Joined by Prim, a headstrong warrior girl searching for her fiancé, and Popoy, a mischievous sprite with amnesia, Randy must collect 8 mana seeds from temples to restore the sword's power and prevent disaster. This is the sweeping tale of Secret of Mana, widely regarded as one of the best RPGs ever to release for the Super Nintendo, or any system for that matter. The game was directed by Koichi Ishii at Squaresoft, only his second directorial credit following Final Fantasy Adventure in 1991. He was a natural pick to helm the game considering what a great success Adventure had been, even breaking through in the West where other RPGs had often struggled. Secret of Mana functioned as a sequel to that game, and in fact in America the original plan was even to call it Final Fantasy Adventure 2. Eventually though, Square settled on Secret of Mana, solidifying the franchise as its own distinct entity apart from its Final Fantasy roots. Whatever the name, gamers both East and West love the game. Positive reviews focused on the excellent music, massive and fleshed out world, and immersive gameplay mechanics. Also appreciated was the option to have 3-player co-op, with each player taking control of one of the protagonists. The enthralling story was also noted as a strength. One of the few complaints some had though was with the English translation, which some felt seemed like it was rushed in order to meet the '93 holiday season. And indeed these suspicions were proved correct, as translator Ted Woolsey would later explain, "I was given just 30 days to translate the Secret of Mana text. This meant I had to fly out to Japan for a month with my wife and kids, and just get on with translating the original scripts practically just as soon as they were completed. There's really no time to do justice to these games." Later he lamented, "I love that game, but I am probably most dissatisfied with the final result. Certainly tried my best, but that thing nearly killed me." In 2009, an enhanced remake included a refreshed translation, and many consider this to be the definitive version of the game, though the original on the Super Nintendo is still a favorite as well. A full 3D remake came out in 2018. This version got some mixed reviews, though it might be a better fit for some newcomers to the genre given its somewhat shallower learning curve. Number 17. Super Mario World. Super Mario World slides quite a few positions from 1992, but nevertheless maintains strong performance in its 4th year, owing in part to continued bundling with some versions of the console, though other bundles at this point are starting to gain some popularity as well. Mario's first appearance in the 16-bit era ended up quite a bit different from how it started. Miyamoto commented in an interview one time, "After porting Super Mario Bros. 3 to the SNES, it felt like the same game to them, despite the improved colors and sprites. Realizing this, their goal would be to use the new hardware to create something totally new." And so things that were too close to Super Mario Bros. 3, such as the raccoon tail Mario, were cut from the game. Originally, the team played around with a winged Mario instead, but eventually they settled on the cape we all know and love, or something like it. Yoshi also looked quite different in his original design. He looked kinda sickly, sort of thin, like butter scraped over too much bread. Though to be fair, you'd probably look like that too if Mario was constantly punching you in the head to make flames shoot out of your mouth. Various other originally planned sprites didn't make it into the game at all, such as this elderly blue Yoshi that likely would have appeared as an NPC on Yoshi's Island, and this shark enemy that seems to pop up out of the depths, sort of like the Blarg monster does in the final version of the game. There are many such cut graphics, and it makes sense that there would be, considering that when the team started work on Super Mario World, what they were doing was really unprecedented. They were on the cutting edge of both technology and gameplay, and what finally resulted has stood the test of time well. Number 16. The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. Coming out on the Game Boy, The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening is a top-down action-adventure game where Link shipwrecks on Koholint Island after a storm. To escape, he has to collect 8 magical instruments from dungeons to awaken the Wind Fish, a giant creature whose dream sustains the island. Did you know that this wasn't the first handheld Zelda game? That honor belongs to 1989's Game & Watch Zelda, a dual-screen game heavily inspired by Zelda 2 that even had its own unique story described in the manual. But despite not being the first attempt at bringing the elfin protagonist to handhelds, Link's Awakening was a pioneering Game Boy game that garnered critical acclaim as well as fan enthusiasm. Like in other Zelda games, gameplay involves exploring an open world, solving puzzles, battling enemies with swords and items like bombs or bows, and interacting with quirky villagers. The game began as an unsanctioned side project when programmer Kazuaki Morita acquired an early Game Boy development kit and started experimenting with a Zelda-like game purely out of curiosity. This after-hours tinkering, later described as a sort of after-school club, drew other Nintendo staff who collaborated without formal approval, testing the hardware's limits. After the release of A Link to the Past, director Takashi Tezuka gained Nintendo's approval to transform this hobby project into an official title, evolving from a planned port into an original adventure over the next 1.5 years. The game's whimsical, dreamlike tone stemmed from this free-spirited origin, allowing developers like Tezuka and scriptwriters Toshiaki Koizumi and Kensuke Tanabe to experiment without strict adherence to Zelda lore. Tezuka called it a parody of the series, with the setting's surreal Twin Peaks-inspired setting eschewing staples like Princess Zelda or the Triforce. This freedom fostered a playful fourth-wall-breaking vibe, with NPCs humorously explaining mechanics or admitting confusion. The game's charm was amplified by cameos from other Nintendo properties added as spontaneous Easter eggs. Mario enemies like Goombas and Piranha Plants appear as foes, while characters like Yoshi, Kirby, Wart, and Dr. Wright pop up as quirky residents. Prince Richard from the Japan-exclusive game For the Frog the Bell Tolls also appears in a quest. You could even let Link grab a chain chomp and take it for a walk. These elements, born from the team's unrestrained creativity, made exploration unpredictable and cemented Link's Awakening as a uniquely charming Zelda title. Many years later, director Tezuka, legendary for directing other games like Super Mario Bros. 3, Super Mario World, and Yoshi's Island, among countless others, confessed that Link's Awakening remained his favorite game to make. Number 15. Dragon Ball Z Super Butoden. You heard that right. The Butoden series makes its second appearance on this year's list with the game that started it all. Super Butoden was the first full-fledged fighting game in the Dragon Ball franchise, marking a shift from previous action-adventure titles to one-on-one combat inspired by the popularity of Street Fighter II. Massive stages allow for both ground and aerial combat, with a color-coded border indicating proximity, enhancing the sense of scale that developers wanted to continue from the anime series. The game's unique split-screen feature, which activates when players move far apart to keep both visible with a radar for positioning, was suggested by chief programmer Maruko Papa during brainstorming to handle large-scale battles within Super Nintendo limitations. Fans of the tremendously popular anime and manga franchise appreciated the inclusion of 10+ well-known characters, and the game even includes voice samples from the anime, which were highly praised for enhancing immersion in a Super Nintendo title. Super Butoden wound up becoming the top-selling game of the year in Japan, even beating out Street Fighter II Turbo, a successful enough launch to start up a long-lasting tradition of Dragon Ball fighting games that's still going strong today, with hit games like 2024's Sparking Zero. Number 14. Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Falling quite a few spots from its massive launch in 1992 is Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Sega's hit follow-up to the first Sonic game a year earlier. After initial hesitation as they waited on definitive sales numbers from Sonic the Hedgehog 1, it eventually became clear to Sega's leadership that their new spiky blue mascot was their ticket to ride, and they bet a lot on the success of the sequel. And so Sega launched an aggressive $10 million marketing campaign for Sonic the Hedgehog 2 in early 1992, aiming to surpass the original success and intensify the console war with Nintendo. Led by marketing director Al Nilsson, efforts included sending mock-up screenshots to magazines, featuring the game on Nickelodeon's Nick Arcade with a competition involving stars from the show Clarissa Explains It All, showcasing it at the 1992 Summer Consumer Electronics Show and Tokyo Toy Show, and of course more than a dozen different commercials that aired in countries across the whole world. Promotions featured t-shirts as pre-order incentives, dry erase countdown boards in stores, and teaser posters with the slogan "Are you up to it?" with the number 2 as, you know, it's like a play on words. Al Nilsson recalls, "We started looking at what else we could go and do. We'll do it on a Tuesday. Sonic Tuesday. We launched in Japan, Australia, Europe, all over the world, never ever been done before." And so they coordinated a pioneering simultaneous global release on November 24th, 1992, the famed Sonic Tuesday, using air shipping to ensure uniform availability across the globe, indeed marking the first such launch of this scale in gaming history. Sega partnered with American freight company Emery Worldwide and produced great Sonic 2 shipment stickers to celebrate the achievement. This all built enormous hype, complemented by classic print ads under the edgy "Welcome to the Next Level" campaign, handled by ad agency Goodby, Burley and Silverstein, that tapped into a broader $65 million SaGa budget. What resulted was a triumphant launch that, when combined with the overall solid quality of the game itself, encouraged strong sales well into the mid-90s, eventually making Sonic 2 the second best-selling Genesis game of all time behind Sonic 1. Number 13, Yoshi's Cookie. An interesting twist on the popular puzzle genre that involved an expanding grid as new cookies entered from the top and the side, Yoshi's Cookie set itself apart from the standard falling block puzzlers of its time. In the game, players try to match the cookies across a row in order to clear them from the playing field, rotating entire lines kinda like a Rubik's Cube. Even though Yoshi's Cookie came out in late 1992, it was in 1993 with the global release of the Super Nintendo version when it really took off. In Japan, an ultra-rare variant was released in 1994. Yoshi's Cookie, Cookies from the Kurapon Oven, was a promotional tie-in with National, which was a Panasonic brand, to hype their NE-KC77 microwave oven, dubbed the Kurapon. Only 500 copies of this special version of the game were ever made, distributed as prizes in a lottery for oven buyers or via a raffle at a regional electronics expo in Japan's Chubu area. This scarcity has made it something of a holy grail for collectors, with loose cartridges fetching around $800 USD and complete in-box versions soaring up to $5,000 or more these days. The Kurapon Oven version of the game keeps the core modes from the original, action, 2-player versus, and puzzle. What sets it apart is a charming new cooking mode, where Yoshi wanders a Super Mario World themed overworld map to collect recipes for 5 cookie types: heart, diamond, checkerboard, flower, and donut. Now these aren't just pixels, they're step-by-step guides to bake the real thing using the Kurapon Oven, blending gaming with home economics in a uniquely Japanese way. Number 12, Yoshi. A falling block puzzler that returns for the third time, Yoshi involves using Mario, or Luigi in 2-player mode, at the bottom of the screen to switch adjacent stacks as pieces fall from the top of the screen, which in addition to Yoshi branding made this game just unique enough to carve out its own fanbase. Yoshi was the first collaboration between Game Freak, later of Pokemon fame, and Nintendo, but it wasn't actually Game Freak's first attempt to do so. In an interview in 2017, founding executive Junichi Masuda says, "When we first decided we wanted to make a game for the Famicom, that's when we started development on Quinty, and we really were true indies at the time. We were just friends doing a hobby as we built this game. We didn't really have any official development equipment, so we just sort of had to hack the NES and figure out how it works so we could develop on it ourselves without the official sort of development tools." They pitched the game to Nintendo, but they weren't interested in dealing with such an informal development outfit. Game Freak did eventually get Namco to publish Quinty in Japan, with Hudson Soft taking on the game in North America, rebranding it Mendo Palace. Together with their second attempt, Smart Ball, Game Freak was achieving some decent experience, but so far they hadn't really turned enough of a profit to ensure a bright future. It would be Yoshi that gave the struggling new studio the capital it needed, not to mention a strong reputation with folks at Nintendo, to keep going and eventually break through with Pokemon Red and Blue 5 years later. Game Freak is still going strong today, of course, and interestingly, not just with the Pokemon franchise, even planning their first ever release of a non-Pokemon AAA title in 2026. The spectacular looking Beast of Reincarnation, and to think it all started with a fairly standard falling block puzzle game. Number 11, Super Mario Bros. 3. Releasing way back in 1988, Super Mario Bros. 3 ties with being the oldest game on this list, still going strong 5 years later. There's no question the third entry in the Super Mario Bros. Series was ambitious. There are so many firsts it's hard to list them all, such as non-linear overworld map, an inventory system to store power-ups, a continue feature, distinct world themes, slope sliding, ground pounding via the Tanuki Suit's transformation, mini-games, enemies like the Koopalings and Chain Chomp, power-ups like the P-Wing and Hammer Suit, the list goes on and on. But something you might not know is that the original plan for the famous side-scrolling platformer was to go even bigger and bolder by switching to an isometric view. In a later interview, when asked about the initially planned diagonal overhead view, directors Takashi Tezuka and Shigeru Miyamoto commented, "Yes, but we couldn't do it well." He said he wanted to look from a little above, but in Super Mario Bros. It's important whether Mario's feet hit the ground or not, even barely. With a diagonal view from slightly overhead, you lost your sense of distance to the ground, so I told him that development would be difficult. Yeah, it was. So partway through development, we switched to a side viewpoint, but there are relics of the bird's eye view in the final product. One such relic that Tezuka was referring to is the black and white checker floor that you can still see on the intro screen. It could be the gamers missed out on something truly revolutionary, and we at Early Epoch sure wish we could get our hands on an early prototype, but considering what we eventually ended up with, it's hard to complain. And so we come to it. We've made it to the top 10 best-selling games of 1993. There's a good mix of returning favorites and innovative newcomers, but who will ultimately take the prize as best-selling game of the year? We'll find out in a minute, but first let's check out some honorable mentions. Doom. Doom is a first-person shooter, really the first-person shooter, that established many of the standards for the genre for at least the next decade that followed. Created by id Software, which had gained some notoriety for their Commander Keen and Wolfenstein games in years prior, Doom puts you in the role of a space marine tasked with battling demons that have made it through portals to invade our solar system. Multiplayer co-op as well as deathmatch modes added a fun social element, and for many this would become their first ever experience in LAN culture. In fact, there are reports of universities in the US banning Doom multiplayer games within mere hours of the game's launch, as their servers were being totally overwhelmed by this newly popularized style of play. Other FPS staples pioneered by Doom include multi-level environments with varying floor and ceiling heights, stairs, elevators, and platforms that added a sense of verticality and realism that seriously boosted immersion, an extensive weapon arsenal that you could carry simultaneously in your inventory and switch between, non-linear levels with secrets and exploration, dynamic lighting effects, and fast-paced run-and-gun gameplay that emphasized rapid movement, continuous action, and aggressive enemy encounters. While few of these innovations were necessarily totally novel, Doom brought them all together and did them in such a way that in the years that followed, anyone else who even tried would be immediately compared to this game. Even though Doom was an overnight phenomenon for id Software, outselling Wolfenstein 3D's first month of sales in just a single day and putting the studio on the map in a serious way, you might be surprised to learn that sales were relatively meager by general industry standards, with the game selling only around 140,000 copies in its first full year after release. A huge financial boon for the fledgling company, no doubt, but unfortunately not enough to make it onto our illustrious top 40. Gunstar Heroes. Gunstar Heroes was the first ever game created by new studio Treasure, which had been recently founded by former Konami employees seeking to try something new and bold, as opposed to Konami's focus on churning out profitable sequels. The run-and-gun game they came up with is truly something special. The smooth and intuitive, yet at the same time intense gameplay, diverse weaponry, and stunning graphics blew away critics, who offered near unanimous acclaim, with EGM naming it their Game of the Month, and GameFan even calling it Game of the Year, suggesting that it set a new standard for action games on the Genesis. Such a surprise was the success of the game that publisher SaGa was caught somewhat flat-footed, with tiny initial shipments of only around 10,000 units each for Japan and America selling out rapidly. More were ordered as word of mouth continued to boost the game's prestige, but there was almost no traditional promotion effort compared to the multi-million-dollar marketing budgets similar games benefited from. While Gunstar Heroes did eventually sell around 300,000 copies in its lifetime, which wasn't bad considering it was the first release for a small studio, it's tempting to think just how big it could have been. Treasure released a sequel on the Game Boy Advance more than 10 years later called Gunstar Super Heroes, while also nearly universally praised, winning the Best GBA Game of the Year at E3. Sales of the sequel were ultimately even more disappointing than the original. Ogre Battle. If you like the combination of thrilling real-time action and strategic tactical role-playing mechanics, then it's hard to do much better than Quest Corporation's Ogre Battle, a Super Nintendo title that released only in Japan until seeing a broader rollout a couple years later. The game is set on the continent of Zedaginia, where the Holy Zedaginian Empire has conquered the land under the rule of the tyrannical Empress Endora. Influenced by the dark mage Rashidi, the Empire employs black magic to maintain its grip, spreading corruption and oppression. The player assumes the role of a customizable leader, chosen via tarot card-based questions at the start, who commands the Liberation Army, a rebel force rising against the Empire to restore justice and peace. Players organize armies into units of up to 5 characters, each with classes like fighters, mages, or beasts that can be promoted based on stats, alignment, and level. On isometric overworld maps, units are deployed from a base and move in real time to liberate towns, capture enemy strongholds, and defeat bosses. Encounters trigger card-based battles, again using a tarot system. 22 cards drawn provide buffs, debuffs, or special effects, influencing auto-resolve fights where front and back row positioning determines attack order and damage. There's a resource management component involving gold from liberated areas. You also need to consider balancing day and night cycles that affect unit strength, for example with undead thriving at night. One of the most interesting features is the morality system, with merciful actions unlocking better recruits and endings, while playing ruthlessly leads to fear-based control but poorer story outcomes. The game was a moderate success, but never sold enough in a single year to crack the top 40, though results were encouraging enough to prompt the creation of a whole series, with sequels and ports on the Super Nintendo, N64, PlayStation, and Game Boy Advance. This is it, your top 10 games of 1993. If you've made it this far, we'd really appreciate if you'd consider subscribing to the channel, as we put out a new video like this one every 2 weeks, and believe me when I tell you we have some real bangers coming up soon. But without further ado, I give you number 10, Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park is a 1993 side-scrolling action platformer published by SaGa for the Genesis. The game was one of countless others that released in 1993 to correspond with the blockbuster movie of the same name. That movie was a big deal, and I mean a really big deal. It was the highest grossing film of the year, outselling second place, Mrs. Doubtfire, by more than double. So when it came to the video game rights, everyone was chomping at the bit. But the one that sticks out the most in terms of quality, and without a doubt the most successful commercially, was Blue Sky Software's Genesis version. Blue Sky programmer Richard Karp notes, "There was a lot of pressure to get the game done in time for the movie's release, because everyone knew it was going to be a huge success, and there was a big marketing campaign planned for the game. It was a great opportunity to put Blue Sky on the map." The game, which incorporates aspects of both the movie as well as Michael Crichton's original novel, has players control Dr. Alan Grant across 7 levels, using non-lethal weapons like tranquilizer guns and stun grenades to navigate obstacles, battle dinos, and escape via helicopter from the visitor center. But adding some serious variety into the mix, you could also play as a velociraptor in 5 levels, relying on speed, jumps, claws, and bites to eliminate guards and corner Dr. Grant. Jurassic Park features what was marketed as artificial dinosaur intelligence, where dinosaur enemies react differently each playthrough, creating unique encounters every time. This random element adds a lot of replayability because it makes the game feel more alive and dynamic. But the graphics were especially praised. Dinosaur models were created using stop-motion photography, with many props from the film itself, including a $75,000 velociraptor puppet that was shipped to the studio for digitization. To add to the realism, paleontologists were brought in to teach the development team about dinosaurs, culminating with the dissection of a chicken to demonstrate the similarities between modern birds and dinosaurs. The development team also took field trips to museums of natural history and zoos to study the physiology and movement of dinosaurs and birds. The hard work paid off because Jurassic Park on the Genesis was a big success with critics, moviegoers, and dinosaur fans, and became the top 6 best-selling game of all time on the system. Number 9, Super Mario Kart. Did you know Nintendo's famous racer Super Mario Kart originated as a prototype for a 2-player version of F-Zero? Following the success of that launch title, it only made sense to follow it up with a sequel a few years later. But in testing the early build, the high speeds and lack of weapons made multiplayer feel unengaging, leading developers to pivot to a slower, item-based kart racer. The initial prototype featured a generic man in overalls driving a kart, with no Mario characters involved until about 3 or 4 months into development, when adding Mario improved the visual appeal. Items like banana peels and shells were introduced to add fun and allow trailing players to catch up, drawing from Mario Universe elements like, of course, the Koopa shell and the Donkey Kong Jr. banana for thematic fit with the game. And a unique battle mode was added to provide a non-racing multiplayer option where players pop each other's balloons using items, emphasizing playful combat over pure speed to differentiate it from standard races. And just as an interesting aside here that might spark a certain furor for some of you, the game's manual actually explicitly encourages screen peeking in battle mode, saying, "Look at the color of the barriers on your opponent's screen to determine where they are, and always keep an eye on your opponent's screen." Say what you want, Nintendo, I'm still forever gonna call this cheating. Commenting on the development of the game, which makes its appearance in the top 10 for the 2nd year in a row, Miyamoto has said, "When people play this game, they have a big smile on their face. That was the big goal for us, a game where both players and onlookers would be laughing and smiling. The biggest extravagance of all was taking everyone to the Nemu no Sato amusement park for a day of go-kart racing. We could have made this game without that bit of research. Number 8. Star Fox. Star Fox is an innovative rail shooter developed by Nintendo in collaboration with British studio Argonaut Games. Gameplay involves navigating groundbreaking 3D environments, engaging enemies in aerial combat, and choosing from 3 difficulty-based routes, each with unique levels. Players control Fox McCloud and his team, Peppy Hare, Slippy Toad, and Falco Lombardi, in their iconic R-Wing fighter crafts, defending Corneria from the evil scientist Andross's invasion across the Lilat system. The unique polygonal graphics are enabled by the Super FX chip, which was developed by Argonaut. Believe it or not, they'd originally planned to create the Super FX chip for the NES years earlier in support of their games for that system like Star Glider. But Nintendo, even though they were impressed with the technical achievement, instead steered them towards the, at that time, new Super Nintendo instead. Argonaut founder Jez San, who'd started the company in the early 80s when he was just 18 years old, later remarked, "We used to joke, internally of course, that the SNES box was the power supply for the Super FX chip, because the entire game code, including all 3D graphics, physics, gameplay, and so on, ran on the Super FX, and the SNES simply displayed the results on screen." The Super FX later went on to sell well over 10 million chips and was the first 3D chip for a home game system. For its part, Star Fox made a big enough splash that it inspired a whole series of games that culminated with 2017's release of sequel Star Fox 2. But that's a story for another time. Number 7. Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat is a pioneering fighting game set in a mystical tournament where Earthrealm's warriors battle Outworld's champions to prevent conquest by the sorcerer Shang Tsung. Developed by a small team of just 4 people, programmer Ed Boon, artist John Tobias and John Vogel, and sound designer Dan Forden, Mortal Kombat stood out from others in the fighting game space primarily via the game's realistic graphics. These were achieved by digitizing footage of real-life actors, captured using John Tobias's personal Hi8 camcorder, resulting in about 300 frames per character and a total of 8 megabytes of graphics data, a big investment for cartridges at the time. Fatalities, the game's iconic gruesome finishing moves, were another unique addition that set it apart from other fighters, allowing players to perform over-the-top kills after winning a match. But the realistic over-the-top violence caught the attention of some for all the wrong reasons. In the US, Democratic Senators Joe Lieberman and Herb Kohl convened hearings to discuss Mortal Kombat among other games that they suggested were causing a corruption of society. Focus was especially on the SaGa version of the game, as Nintendo had insisted on some pretty heavy censoring on the Super Nintendo, such as replacing blood with sweat, a decision that spared them some of the negative press but also cost them a significant portion of sales. The hearings eventually led to the creation of the Entertainment Software Rating Board, or ESRB, a self-regulatory organization that has overseen the assignment of age and content ratings on video games released in America ever since. But at least gamers in the USA still got to play the game. In some countries, such as Germany, Mortal Kombat was outright banned for the next 10 years. Number 6. Super Mario All-Stars. Play the 3 classic NES Mario games Super Mario Bros., Super Mario Bros. 2, and Super Mario Bros. 3, all for the price of one, and even with a few very attractive enhancements to sweeten the deal. Plus, at least for gamers in the West, a totally new game called The Lost Levels, a long-lost sequel that at that point had only come out in Japan. It was a single game cartridge packed full of the first 10 years of Nintendo's rich history, said the late great Nintendo president Satoru Iwata. This was the deal presented by Super Mario All-Stars, and it was a deal that was too sweet for most Super Nintendo gamers to pass up. The most obvious improvement made compared to the original releases on the NES is the updated graphics, with more detailed environments, parallax scrolling, 3D-like blocks, wavy water distortion, brighter underground levels, animated elements like bullet bill arms and flags, new backgrounds, and character redesigns, like giving Luigi his own taller and skinnier sprite. The remastered soundtrack added echo and bass for some extra punch, as well as some new sound effects. A save feature allows players to resume from the start of a world you've accessed instead of having to start all over, with 4 different save slots available. This made the game accessible to a whole new category of gamers. Certain bugs were fixed, like the infamous minus world glitch in the original Super Mario Bros. Game. And various minor changes to gameplay were also included that Nintendo thought improved the enjoyment of the games. The experiment to bring classic Mario fun into the 16-bit era was a big success, and the game became a mainstay of the console for the rest of its run, being bundled with certain versions of the console and eventually outselling every other game except Super Mario World itself. Number 5. Sonic the Hedgehog. Slipping only one position since 1992, Sonic the Hedgehog continues its dominance over Mario in the 16-bit war of the mascots, but we'll see who has the last laugh as we continue along the top 10. Sonic has a pretty bizarre origin story, beginning with his iconic first appearance as a dangling doodad hanging from a rearview mirror like a fuzzy die. That's right, Sonic's first appearance was not in fact in Sonic the Hedgehog, but instead was a mere cameo in 1990's Radmobile, a pretty obscure beginning for what would become SEGA's prized flagship multimedia franchise. Whereas Mario was a slightly plump, middle-aged Italian plumber, Sonic was a slim, Michael Jackson-inspired spiky blue hedgehog. You heard that right, character designer Naoto Oshima credits Michael Jackson as a major inspiration for Sonic, even down to his red shoes. He also mentions that the basic design of the character was a blend of Felix the Cat's head with Mickey Mouse's body. And if you think that's weird, Sonic's original design was as a rocker with big fangs. He was a member of a band and had a girlfriend named Madonna. Co-creator Yuji Naka let us in on another weird tidbit when he said, "The biggest thing I remember we had that we didn't use in Sonic 1 was the breakdancing. We had this idea for the sound test. See, we wanted to have a separate sound test screen with an animation of Sonic breakdancing while the Sonic band played the game music." Number 4. Disney's Aladdin. If I didn't actually make the Super Nintendo game, I would probably buy the Genesis one. Animation-wise, I think the Genesis version is better. The Genesis version had a sword, actually. I wanted to have a sword. I'm really biased, as we made the original game and got Disney to deliver the animation, so I'd flip the quote. If I didn't actually make the Genesis version, I'd probably buy the SNES one. These were the words of Shinji Mikami and David Perry, respectively the designers of the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis versions of Aladdin. While Jurassic Park dominated the box office in 1993, Aladdin had held the spot of the highest-grossing film the year prior, and its cultural presence was no less prevalent, arguably far more so among the core gaming demographic at the time, which in the 90s skewed a lot younger than it does today. And so, like with all smash hit movies in that era, development studios, publishers, and console corporations all scrambled to secure the rights to make a game. Versions came out for the Game Boy, NES, Amiga, PC, Game Gear, and Master System, but the two that stand out head and shoulders above the rest are of course the versions for the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo. The Super Nintendo version, developed and published by Capcom, emphasizes acrobatic platforming and focuses on jumping on foes, throwing apples at them, and gliding through the air with a sheet, while your faithful companion Abu follows in tow. This version also appealed to a wide gaming audience, featuring pretty simple gameplay that was easy-ish to master. The Genesis version was quite a bit different, owing to a Chinese wall having been established between the two teams to prevent overlap and ensure two truly distinct experiences. Originally, the task was given to Blue Sky Software, but as they were pretty small at the time and had a lot to focus on in Jurassic Park, Disney grew impatient and instead passed the game to Virgin, with Disney themselves providing the hand-drawn animation. And so despite a late start, the Genesis team had a huge advantage when it came to visuals. This version also featured interesting level design like the surreal Inside the Lamp level, and had an increased focus on combat, driven largely by the inclusion of Aladdin's sword. Wait a minute. How come Sega's allowed to use swords and we're not? Look, this is a video game. We have to have some violence. No, this isn't going to work. We're going to have to do that. Number 3. Super Mario Land 2, 6 golden coins. After being released at the tail end of 1992, Super Mario Land 2 really hit its stride in 93 with a broader global release. The initial draft of the Game Boy platformer was actually rejected by Nintendo execs for feeling too uncharacteristic of Mario, prompting a major rework to align more closely with Super Mario World. But you wouldn't exactly know it, considering just how unique and quirky this game feels compared to traditional Mario entries. There's the magic carrot power-up, which transforms Mario into his bunny Mario form, giving him more powerful jumps and a slow descend using his big ears. There's also the way collecting coins doesn't just automatically grant you free lives like usual, but instead can be gambled in a casino minigame, adding a unique risk-reward element. And of course, the most obvious difference is the introduction of a new antagonist, Mario's arch-nemesis Wario. The desire to have a unique nemesis for Mario was inspired by the relationship between Popeye and Bluto, an interesting callback to the origins of Mario himself as Jumpman when Nintendo's original idea for a Popeye arcade game fell through. But you can hear all about that in our Donkey Kong Pendium video. As for Wario, his name derives from Mario, combined with the Japanese word warui, which means basically bad. And that's more or less his whole original concept, an evil reverse Mario that takes all the good character traits of the beloved plumber and completely reverses them. Even the W on his hat is a playful nod to his role as an upside-down counterpart to Mario. Fans surprisingly loved Wario almost as much as the original Mario, leading to Nintendo's decision to turn him into something of an anti-hero, even starring in the sequel Super Mario Land 3 Wario Land. Number 2. Tetris. That's right, the king has finally fallen. After 2 years in the top spot, Tetris gets bumped to a still perfectly reasonable silver position. As we've covered in previous entries in this series, Tetris was an absolute cultural juggernaut. Tetris was everywhere in the early 90s, even in outer space. It was in this year, 1993, when Russian cosmonaut Alexander Serebrov boarded the Soyuz TM-17 rocket bound for the Mir space station with a secret companion, a Nintendo Game Boy loaded with Tetris. In the cramped, humming modules of Mir, amidst experiments and spacewalks, Serebrov found solace in the falling Tetrominoes. Floating in zero gravity, he rotated L shapes and squares, chasing high scores during rare breaks. The Game Boy joined the cosmonaut in orbiting Earth over 3,000 times, spending 196 days in space. In 2011, it was auctioned off for a surprisingly cheap $1,220 via the auction house Bonham's famous Space History sale. We'll put a link in the description to the webpage for the auction if you're interested in seeing the other cool artifacts that were sold. As the sun begins to set on the reign of Tetris at the top of the charts, one feels the need to pause and reflect on its lasting legacy. After all, where would the gaming industry be without Tetris? It was the Game Boy's killer app, and it's possible other huge franchises like Pokemon might not be where they are today without Tetris opening the door. It also popularized the puzzle genre that's brought in millions of people who otherwise might not have thought of games as being something they'd consider. And even though the game will make a couple more appearances on this before the end, it seems fitting to use this opportunity to say thank you, Tetris, for all that you've accomplished. Number 1. Street Fighter II. Street Fighter II edges out Tetris in 1993 to claim the spot as the best-selling game of the year. The game involves players choosing one of 8 diverse warriors, each with unique styles and special moves, to compete in a global tournament hosted by the shadowy Shadaloo organization led by dictator M. Bison. The basic story follows fighters like wandering martial artist Ryu seeking ultimate strength, Interpol agent Chun-Li avenging her father's death, and US Air Force pilot Guile hunting Bison for killing his comrade. Interestingly, in the original Japanese release, the boxer Balrog was actually the one named M. Bison, with M standing for Mike Bison. Get it? Fearing the inevitable lawsuit from real-life boxer Mike Tyson if they released As Is globally, the overseas version gave the M. Bison name to the evil dictator Vega, whose name in turn was given to the Spanish bullfighter Balrog, leaving Balrog as the final name of the boxer. It was a weird solution, but it seems to have worked because for millions of gamers around the world, it's hard to imagine these characters by any other name. And the character designs are really where this game shines. The 8 playable characters and 4 CPU exclusives each feel so unique that replayability is baked right into the cake. You can play this game over and over and it still feels fresh and interesting. And the global cultural nature of the characters gives a feeling of scope and scale that really raises the stakes. The popularity of the game translated to other media as well, with 2 different film adaptations being released in 1994 alone, in addition to an animated TV series and even a line of G.I. Joe action figures. A bit of a weird mashup that resulted from Hasbro buying the toy rights. One of the most influential video games of all time, Street Fighter II certainly earned its spot at the top of the hill in 1993. So what was your favorite game of 1993? Let us know in the comments. Did you favor the exciting arcade fighting staples like Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat? Or perhaps you have fond memories blowing up your siblings in 4-player Bomberman fun? Up next is 1994, with some absolutely epic games like an RPG considered by some to be the best ever, the triumphant revival of old favorites, and even the launch of a brand new generation of consoles that promise to shake things up like never before. But which game will earn the top spot? Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can find out.